and we have a particular focus on trying to hold public authorities to account on their climate emergency policies. But I'm going to say right from the outset that this is just really one sort of recent example, a case study, if you will, of kind of grassroots climate action. I think my role in this panel is to, along with those really good provocations that you should have a copy to try and tease out some of the resonances of the climate emergency from what Julian has introduced. I'm certainly not representative or cannot speak for the Green movement, if there is such a homogenous bloc. So I'm sure many of you here will also have been involved in things, and yeah, if we can make a connection, that's already. So before I pick out maybe 3 things that I'd like to flag about sort of maybe my recent experiences of doing local climate action that I think have chimed what Julian said. No one person, no one activist is just their organisation. I'm sure those that trespassed on Kinder had many other things in their lives and backgrounds apart from that. So I just want to just flag a couple of things about myself and why I also have a broader interest in land, really. As you might be able to tell from my accent, although I've been in Manchester for much of the past decade, I didn't grow up here. I grew up in the Fens, so essentially on reclaimed land. So you never quite take the stability of land or sea level rises for granted. It's an area which is some of the most farmed land in the country and is likely to be so, really rich agricultural soil. But it's also areas where a lot of rewilding experiments have taken place. So some of the Fenland, Wicken Fen is a really good example of that as well. When I was growing up in my back garden, aged about 8, the Ministry of Defence came into our back garden and put a big stone in the back and said that actually half the garden actually belonged to them, which as a very irate 8-year-old who lost really where my slide and swing set was, I began to kind of, sort of question who owns what. And finally, just as a kind of a personal snippet, although we're talking about rambling, about 10 years ago, I was very involved in outdoor swimming. And if you want to try and explain who owns what and why you're there, it's hard enough when you're walking, but it's certainly fairly challenging when you're in a wetsuit and treading water. And a few years before wild swimming was more common. So yeah, there is also a very active campaign group that I'm not particularly involved in anymore about kind of waterways and rights away there. But back to kind of teasing out some of the work we've done at Climate Emergency Manchester. We have particularly focused on sort of petitions, Freedom of Information Acts, which are another way that we found out quite a lot who owns what in the country. We haven't been involved in direct action ourselves, but that's not a never say never. It's a mix of tactics. But the 3 things that I particularly want to draw out from what Julian said are as follows. One, about the kind of the importance of taking the longer view in climate activism and green politics. Secondly, about maybe focusing on the kind of the dangers of just celebrating a few successes and seeing that a tactic or an approach worked once and therefore we should repeat it. And then thirdly, about how the politics can get stripped out of things. So firstly, on that longer view, it's really good to begin with that history and to see us taken back to the 1930s. But as Julian pointed out, and I really liked his word, hinterlands. So that even that event didn't just come from them. It in itself had a kind of a longer view and a longer history. And although there's decades, maybe centuries of sort of green movements and campaigning against the environment, what you're struck by, or what I've been struck by doing climate activism, is is how rarely we actually like look backwards. It's really nice to be at an event where we're kind of looking backwards and talking to lots of people who've got a historical mindset. But over the past few years, I'm more often asked to speak about the launch of something being kind of new. We've got a new plan, a new group, a new way to do things. And it can be kind of permanently looking forwards rather than thinking, have we already tried this? Has somebody already tried it? Did it work? Did it not work? So I think that kind of sort of permanently setting up and launching and trying to do new things can sometimes lead to things being lost and working out what's already been done. Of course, that isn't just a fault on those who are trying to do activism or do campaigns. It's very convenient for those in power that we forget and that we don't look backwards. And certainly at a kind of local level, a lot of our activists will be focused on local authorities and the council. It's really helpful if every few years a sort of a campaign group dissolves, or the people involved kind of move around, maybe for very good reasons. You know, they get a job in another city, they have children or take on caring responsibilities, which means they can't be involved. But that means that you forget what's been tried before. I'm sure it's not unique to Manchester, but it takes on a particular flavour. So over the past few years, we've seen climate action plans kind of launched that seem that look very shiny and glossy, because Manchester's quite good at launching things and selling itself. But actually, 3 years earlier, there was another climate action plan that was never followed up upon. So that combination of maybe groups not having that longer view, not being very good at passing the baton from generations, combined with the fact that it's really convenient for those in all kinds of powerful positions for us to forget and just to bury and forget inconvenient things that have been tried and forgotten. Means it's really important that we have a longer view and a historical mindset in everything that we do. So then I said I was going to draw something about focusing on sort of successes, and I think it's really interesting that we do see the trespass as a kind of a success as sorts. And I was also interested by that Julian said that it wasn't repeated again because there were other things to do. But I wonder if there was also a sense that trespass might be a tactic that worked and had been tried repeated times. Certainly you see a lot of kind of repeating the same sort of like repertoires and tactics amongst climate and environmental movements, when sometimes then they're not always working. So I think an interesting example is maybe the Fridays for Future movement. When that first happened, it was something really, really different, a real watershed. I went down to some of the early ones that took place in Manchester in St. Peter's Square. Of course, even for that first event, there were plenty of people that present. Not all schools are as easy to get out of to St. Peter's Square. But then over time, by repeating sort of exactly the same things in exactly the same places, some of that first energy was lost. Things were then disrupted by a pandemic, and it was quite hard to know for some of those organising how to take that kind of repertoire and choreography, to use some of Julian's phrases, online. They have subsequently resumed in St. Peter's Square, but essentially seem to be trying sort of some of the same things. And it's just knowing when there's sometimes we need to kind of not because something worked once, not just keep trying the same things. We saw another sort of set of similar kind of movements and tactics used in some of the kind of the Kill the Bill marches, which are also a feature of the centre of Manchester in the past few years. The first one had a real energy for it, but then when the same routes were tried and some of the same, some of the authorities worked out what was happening, whether there should have been perhaps more reflection at the time about whether taking the same routes would have worked, should have been interesting. So whether even if Kinder Scout hadn't been a one-off, whether there would have been that kind of reflection on how to vary the routes and try different tactics, I think is interesting. So then thirdly, I said about sort of politicization and taking the politics out of things. When Julian, who I'd agree is the absolute driving force why we're here tonight, sort of first had a discussion with him and first saw his thoughts on the matter, what appealed to me was that he was putting the politics front and center, which was really refreshing, because the first few times that I'd encountered Kinder Scout when I first kind of moved to the Northwest, it was really hard to actually work out what the politics was. The sort of the leisure aspects had been foreground, and it's nice to see that in recent years they've come back, but again we have to make an element to that. And I think similarly in some climate activism, the politics can go out of it. It's very easy to do actions that might be, say a kind of helping a green space or a litter picking, but forgetting like what are the actual structures underlying. To take one kind of final example to close on, because we've got so many days and anniversaries at the moment. Tomorrow is Earth Day, an event that was kind of born in another set of very febrile times in the 1970s, but over the years has kind of gradually got stripped out. And when I was invited to make some contributions to an Earth Day event tomorrow, it was very hard to work out what was the kind of the sort of their theory of change, what were the big forces that they saw. It was about my individual actions and how I could make my area greener. So we've got to keep the politics and the power structures in sight when we're reflecting on Kinder and we're thinking about the climate emergency today.